Okay.
Woo! So I have to tell you right off the bat, I cried so hard for this case. So hard. Kids hit me hard, all the
Yeah.
time. But woo, this one got me real good.
It's a rough one.
It is a
Um,
rough one. It's a rough one because I see multiple victims in one scenario. Um,
yeah.
so, I mean, of course, it's your story, your brother's story. So, where do you want to start?
Um, I'm not sure. I always kind of go through it chronologically. So, but I don't know if that's the best way to do it or not. It's just the way my brain works because I have a hard time bouncing around.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I think
but
whatever works best for you. I know a lot of people here have an idea of who Jacob is, but for the people that aren't listening, I definitely want them to chronologically understand why this case is so important. Being a kid in the system, I know how these things escalate and how they get
mhm.
to where they are. And I believe the only way that we prevent that in the future is by teaching people the signs to look for. So,
Yeah, I think it's important to start by talking about the fact that it's been 33 years since my brother was murdered, and it's been 33 years without justice. Um, it's definitely been a struggle for my mom and I. There's been times where we've just felt like we've been left kind of holding the bag, so to speak, in the sense that um, for the longest time, the prosecutors and people in the state have not really even acknowledged what happened, and somewhat treated us like we were making a big deal out of nothing, which
right.
was almost as traumatizing as losing him.
It's like losing him again,
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
also just feeling um, like you start to question your sanity a little bit. Like, did I make this whole thing like worse than it is? Why is nobody else feeling the way that we feel about this? Like, why is nobody else seeing that the murder of a baby is horrifying, and why is nobody wanting to do anything about it? Those things have been, I think, the hardest to deal with.
Do you ever find yourself still, as a child of abuse? I can definitely say I find myself sometimes going, well, maybe it wasn't as bad because no one else is listening. Do you ever feel like even now question that?
Yeah, yeah. It's you start to kind of fall into that whole brainwashing mindset that was there, back then. My stepfather was very good at that, at convincing us that we were crazy and that we were the ones that were wrong. And so it's easy to slip back into that and to start second guessing everything. And then, of course, that brings up all these other feelings and everything else, that's really hard to deal with. So I think that's kind of like the first point I want to make, is that it's been this long and there's been some movement, but not enough movement. Um, the other thing that's really important to note is that this. So I kind of see it. Not that I'm like the center of the universe, right? But like this is like a signpost in New Mexican history of kind of a, a systematic problem that we have here, um, and it continues to happen. So there's countless cases of kids who have been murdered as a result of child abuse in this state. And you look at cases like in California, like the Gabriel Fernandez case. Um, this is the kind of thing that's happening all the time in this state. And the reason I started my podcast was to bring this out into the open, because people don't necessarily want to hear these horrible stories because they're horrible.
Right.
I remember seeing people commenting about the Gabriel Fernandez documentary, like, "Oh, this is too much for me," and I understand, I get it,
Yeah.
but if we're not willing to look at this, then it's not going to stop. If we're not
No.
willing to talk about this, then it's not going to stop. And so, if you want this to stop, we have to face it. We can't
We have to
hide
talk
from it.
about it.
Yeah.
Exactly. There was a poignant moment when your mom said, I listened to your podcast and oh my goodness, I just had to sit on the floor and cry for a little bit, because there's a point where she says, I was 26. I didn't know. And I feel like if we educate everyone, maybe someone in her life would have been able to go, hey, this is a flag. This is something you should be paying attention to. Or even if it was a publicly educated thing, she could have noticed something. And no matter how many times she says she doesn't blame herself, you, as a mother, you hear it in her heart. She blames herself.
Yeah. Somebody had asked on a subsequent episode, because I did 3 parts on Jacob's story, they'd asked if we were worried about people blaming her, if she was worried about people blaming her. And my answer to that is, I don't think anybody can blame her as much as she's blamed herself over the last 33 years, which is heartbreaking for me, because she was very much groomed. She was very much love bombed. She was very much in a situation where it did seem impossible. It really did. And so I just don't think that people can understand that unless they've been there, I guess.
Right.
But I guess we can start at the beginning.
Yeah,
It's a good
with
place to start.
who this beautiful little boy was.
Oh, Jacob. He, even as a baby, he had a huge personality. He was crazy. He was a daredevil. And he brought so much joy into our family. Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. I don't know how you do this every time, because just reading documents, like I said, listening to it, I had dreams about him last night. Like it's one that gets you, because you can tell he was this amazing light. So to lose a light from like that in this world is hard. It's very hard.
Yeah. I prayed for him. So my dad is a Pentecostal he passed away this year from COVID.
Oh, sorry.
He was a Pentecostal evangelist, and there were a lot of challenges in my parents' relationship. The biggest one was that my dad would just leave for weeks at a time, and my mom would be left trying to figure out how to manage the household without any money coming in. And it was very challenging. But I remember, and I kind of feel bad about it now that I see it as an adult, what my mom was going through, that I was like praying for this other sibling, which probably put a more difficult financial strain on our life. But I prayed for him, and he showed up, and he was massive. He was 10 pounds when he was born. He was this incredible child that I immediately fell in love with. I remember just being so enamored with him and wanting him to be everywhere that I was, and wanting him to just wanting to be close to him, wanting to hold his hand or get his bottle for him, or, just whatever I could do to help. And then he got bigger and older and started kind of talking a little bit. He would do this thing where he had this old-fashioned swing. It wasn't old-fashioned then, but it is now. It was basically a death trap, because the 80s. And
Oh, was it the wind up?
Yeah, it
Like
was
on the
totally the
side?
wind
Yeah.
up one. But it also was like made of this really flimsy, I don't know if it was aluminum or steel, but it was like
They were aluminum
very
for
sharp.
sure.
for some reason. Um, I was to answer your question, Ron. I was 5 when Jacob was born, but he did this thing where the swing would go forward, and he would grab the front legs, and he would throw the entire thing backwards. And
Oh my.
the first time he did it, we were horrified. Like everybody jumped out of their seat, and they were like, "Oh my god, what's going on?" And he just sat there and laughed. And his laugh was like no other laugh I've ever heard. He did this kind of like like it was so weird. But he would lay there and laugh. And after a while, we just got used to him doing that because he did it all the time. He loved throwing the entire thing backwards and lying on the ground. I remember another time that he was in the kitchen pulling all of the drawers out of the kitchen counters, and there was cutlery flying all around him, and he's just laughing. Like he thought it was the best thing that ever happened to him. He was crazy.
No fear.
And I don't think that the the world was ready for Jacob Landin. He was a little bit out of control, and I bet he would have been a terror as a teenager and probably given my mom a stroke or something. Um, but he made our lives very exciting and very interesting. It was never boring. It was always fun. Um, I just remember that about him. So that was
He liked to keep you on your
he
toes.
kept everybody on their toes. But he was also so loving and affectionate and happy. He was just always happy. My parents separated when I was 5. I think Jacob was probably 5 or 6 months old. And my dad was having an emotional relationship with another woman, and my mom found out about it. And so she had had enough. She was done dealing with that. So we moved away back to New Mexico. We were living in Texas at the time. And we moved back in with my grandparents. And that's when this, I don't even know what to call him. Shit bag.
Yeah, there's not a good word. I mean, monster isn't good
Yeah.
enough for what he
Yeah.
is. No, absolutely not.
So he was my dad's best friend, and he started.
That's an interesting
Mhm.
dynamic for me that he didn't ever. I always wonder when you say that, like, did he ever question him, see anything bad in him, think,
Nobody did. Nobody. He was charismatic. He was gregarious. He was friendly. He was happy. At least that was the image that he portrayed to everybody. Um, Everybody liked him. Everybody thought he was great and wonderful, and my mom and I also believed this about him. So he started showing up and kind of inserting himself into our lives, and immediately started love bombing us, which we didn't know what that was back then, but
right?
we learned later what it is, and it's exactly what he did. He showered us with gifts and compliments and attention, and I was somewhat starved for a father figure at this point, because
Your dad was always
he
in
was always
town,
gone.
right?
My mom, I think, was starved for affection, and yeah, I would say that she was vulnerable at the time. Um, and so he immediately kind of consumes our family dynamic, and before my mom knows it, she's in a relationship with this man, and everything seemed great. um, all I knew was he had a really cool car. He had a race car, and he liked to watch movies like the Terminator and things that I thought were really cool at the time. He loved to eat candy, and I love to eat candy, so that was like a good situation for me. I was not
Right.
ashamed for wanting candy in that situation. It was like totally acceptable for us to just constantly be eating it. Um, And so everything seemed okay. And then weird stuff started to happen to Jacob. Um, he started to have bruises on his body. He had a brain or a head injury, and he had to have his he had a lump on his head. It had to be lanced and drained. Um, I was blamed for that. I was told that I was jealous of him and that I kicked him in the head. Um, and you know, I didn't want to cause problems, so I just kind of went along with what everyone was saying. I don't know. I might have been jealous of Jacob. I don't remember being jealous of Jacob, but I remember being jealous of his name. I thought that he had a cooler name than I did, and I was mad about that. Until my grandmother told me that my name meant princely, and then I was like, "Oh, cool, I'm good now. Like, you can
No,
keep
I'm
your
good.
name."
Totally good.
But I don't remember being jealous of Jacob. It's possible that I was, you know.
I think there's sibling rivalry, jealousy. My biggest one with the first incident like that, draining laceration, I was CNA and registration in emergency room. And we would have seen that. And I get now we're in, the 2000s, things are different. It was way different than it was in the 80s. But I just don't know, as a nurse, a doctor, a registration officer that was in there, a social worker, how that first one wasn't addressed, or there wasn't even at least a social worker that came in and sat and had like a conversation just to kind of narrow out what could have possibly, because kids fall. My husband went down as a baby in his walker down a
Mhm.
set of stairs in the 80s, and his parents were greeted at the emergency room by social workers and
Yeah.
police officers. So there's a big, big red flag that this was missed the first time.
So, so this did open an investigation with Child Protective Services, but I learned this later. My mom was not made aware of this.
Right.
The social worker showed up when my mom was at work, and my stepfather basically chased them away. And I learned about this later. I didn't know, my mom didn't even know that this had happened. But a neighbor actually had called and reported that Jacob was crying a lot. And and so this, coupled with the injury, started an investigation, but it didn't go anywhere. Once the
I
once the
saw
social
that.
worker was chased off, then it was just over, I guess. Like, you meet just the tiniest bit of resistance and you stop. That doesn't make any sense at all to me.
Right. And how she wasn't, why you would address anybody but the mother. The biological
Right.
mother is where I'm like confused at the hospital, why she wasn't addressed or she wasn't taken
100%.
talked to at
And
all.
and also, for the neighbor to call, like, it had to have been really bad, because, like, I mean, it's not even like they're in the same house, like, it's next door, so it had to have been pretty loud, which really bothers me. So, stuff started kind of piling up. Things kept getting weirder. My mom now believes that something is up. She doesn't know exactly what is up. I'm being blamed for all of this. And so she decides she's going to send me to California with my dad uh, to protect me. And uh, I left, and this stuff kept happening. It didn't stop. My mom found sunflower seed shells in Jacob's crib. There were more unexplained injuries. And there was an incident where my grandmother was watching Jacob. And like I said before, he was crazy. He was a daredevil. He was out of control. And my grandma goes to pick him up above her head and kind of play with him like you do with babies. And he started panicking and screaming and grabbing at her hair, clutching her hair. And my mom picks up Jacob, and my grandmother's like, I'm really worried that something's wrong, because normally Jacob likes me to pick him up above my head. He likes me to play with him. like that. And today he started freaking out. And this is so out of character for him. And so my grandma shows my mom, and he does the same exact thing. And so my mom goes to her boyfriend and confronts him and says, "Hey, are you playing rough with Jacob? Like, what's going on?" And he's like, "Oh no, I didn't do anything." And so he's like, "All I do," and he goes to pick up Jacob, and Jacob is practically trying to jump out of his hands into my mom's arms, screaming and crying. And so my mom starts to limit how much time Jacob is allowed to be with him. Um, it's basically, Jacob is about 9 months old at this point, and um, she stops letting Jacob be alone with him. And she's obviously very suspicious at this point. I'm out of the picture. Things keep happening. So, um, one night in April 1987, Jacob's 9 months old. Um, my mom is working. My grandmother calls her and she says, "Hey, I'm wanting to go to church. What should I do with Jacob?" My mom was feeling, I guess, like she felt bad for my grandmother, so she said, "Well, I guess you can take him to my boyfriend's house because I get off in an hour." And so immediately my mom starts to panic. She just has this really bad feeling about everything, and she starts begging her boss to let her get off work early. And her boss is like, "No, you need to work the rest of your shift." So she starts to busy herself so she doesn't think about it. And then a pretty big rush of customers comes in. She's working in a grocery store at this time. I don't know if I said that. And within, I would say, half an hour of Jacob being dropped off, my mom's boyfriend runs in to the grocery store and he's panicking. And at the same time, an ambulance is going by really fast on the main road in the town that we were in. And he's telling my mom that Jacob is unresponsive and he doesn't know what happened. And so they go to the hospital. And Jacob's injuries are so severe that he has to be airlifted to Albuquerque, which is about 75 miles away. And they take him to Presbyterian Hospital. And his injuries are so bad that Presbyterian Hospital can't help him. So they rush him to the only trauma center we have in Albuquerque. And he's rushed into emergency surgery. And he doesn't make it through his surgery. So, um,
Take your time. This is a rough one. It really is.
yeah, I kind of rushed through that. Sorry.
No, you're good. And I think from what I understood from reading everything, the time that the suspect had him was such a short amount of time that this was basically the second he got his hands on this child, he started hurting this child. And then just the process of transportation to transportation to transportation, really, and him taking the time to actually reach out for help is what kind of escalated everything to where he wasn't able to make it through that last surgery.
He had according to the autopsy, it was blunt force trauma to the head that was the cause of death for him. Subdural hematoma. So he was bleeding inside his brain. And my mom and my grandparents and her boyfriend all rushed. They had to drive, so it was about an hour's drive to get there. By the time my mom got there, she was able to see him. She saw him for a minute. He took a big breath. And then he was taken to surgery, I think, is what happened. And he didn't make it out. And the entire time, the doctor noted in his report that my mom's boyfriend kept saying something along the lines of, "This isn't going to look good for me. This doesn't look good for me." Um, he just kept saying that over and over again. And the doctor even noted, I think you probably saw that in the file, that he was more concerned about himself. Like, he never once asked if Jacob was okay. He never once seemed even remotely worried about Jacob, who was in brain surgery. He was more worried about himself the entire time, which is
And how
right,
this was going
and
to
how my
look.
mom was going to react. There was never any concern for Jacob. Ron, I don't understand your question. Was Jacob in ambulance when he went to your mom? I don't think I understand that.
Oh, was Jacob already in the ambulance when
Yes.
the suspect ran
Yes.
to get? Yeah. I think with that one, what I see is you have those manipulators, but then you have someone that they feel like they're standing in front of that they can't manipulate, and the
Yeah.
facade starts to break. So they start to try to ask these questions about themselves, not seeming like that's where it's going. But I think he knew the way that doctor
Yeah.
looked at him, because I've seen it happen in the ER. They look at them, they don't play. They know exactly. And I think he saw it right then. This guy doesn't believe me. This
Right.
guy knows what I did.
So he immediately starts making up stories. I think he had 4 or 5 different variations of what happened. So I'm going to kind of backtrack a little bit. So I'm in California with my dad. I'm in a completely new school, new state. It's probably like 4 or 5 in the morning, and my dad wakes me up and tells me we have to rush to New Mexico because there's been an accident and my brother is in the hospital. And so we fly to Albuquerque. We were picked up at the airport by my mom. Jacob has already passed away at this point. We didn't know that until we got to the airport. And I just remember seeing my mom and the heartbreak on her face, the shock on everyone's faces. And we were all immediately pulled into separate rooms and interviewed separately. My grandmother was pulled into a different room. My mom was pulled into a room, her boyfriend, and then my dad and I were pulled into an interview with the police, the state police. And they started asking me about the allegations that I had hurt Jacob and that I was jealous of him. And I remember being very afraid, like sitting in front of the police officer, feeling like I had done something wrong and being very nervous. And so they asked me if I had ever hurt Jacob, and I got very agitated. That's what they said in the report. I don't remember that. And eventually I said no. And then they started to ask me if my mom's boyfriend had ever hit me. And I think I said something along the lines of, he hasn't hit me, but he acts like he's going to. And, that was a pretty traumatizing experience as well. I thought maybe I was going to go to prison or something. I didn't really understand what was going on.
Well, it's trauma rolling on top of trauma, rolling on top of trauma.
But in his interview, and there's bits and pieces of it in the file, it's not very clear. I don't want to necessarily say, I know that like Fern would probably say this, but I feel like they could have done a better job documenting.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'll say it 100%. They could have done a better job, because we have a supposed confession. But
Yeah.
that's all lost.
So I feel like the document, it alludes to some stuff. It's not very clear. But it does say that there are several iterations, and it does give some of those. So I think one of the stories that he gave was that he was dubbing cassette tapes. That's been pretty consistent in his story. He was dubbing cassette tapes, and he set Jacob onto the couch, and he turned around, Jacob fell off, hit his head on the coffee table, and then was vomiting. Okay, that's story one. Story two was he was dubbing cassette tapes, and Jacob started fussing a little bit, so he picked him up and lost his grip, and Jacob's head hit the arm of the armchair in the living room, which would be sharp. Both of those would be sharp force trauma injuries. They would not be blunt force trauma injuries.
Exactly.
There was another one where he claimed that he was lying on his back, and Jacob's head was like resting on his neck for some reason, which doesn't make any sense either. And he got up really fast and hit Jacob in the head with his head. Maybe, I don't know, but this was like on the top of Jacob's head. This was not, it wasn't.
No, babies headbutt all the time. I mean, my friends have had broken nose. They headbutt, and no, we don't see that.
Yeah, Fern, it was right on top of his head. So there's no way that those injuries that he was describing would have happened and resulted in what happened to Jacob. So so we have red flag of no concern for Jacob. We have red flag of all these stories that don't line up with what actually happened. And so then it gets weird, like kind of fuzzy. We have the funeral. My mom is not talking to him at this time. And I didn't really understand what was happening until one day we're at my grandparents' house, and her boyfriend pulls up, and my grandfather runs out of the house as fast as he can. And he rushes up to the car, and he starts yelling. And he's like, "Why don't you hit somebody who can talk, you piece of shit?" And her boyfriend backs out really fast, peels out, takes off. And that's when I started to suspect that he was responsible for what happened to Jacob. I'm gonna get some water.
An interesting thing I noticed is it was always when it was just him and you and Jacob together to begin with, that these things happened. I can totally see where Eric is jealous, because Eric's going to get to see soon what exactly is going to go on here and is going to start speaking. Jacob can't speak. So the only thing I can do is to divide them by simply saying that he is a threat. And knowing how much your mother loved her children, she is going to do whatever it is to protect both of you. Whether you were a threat or not, she was still going to love you and try to put you in the best situation. I don't know if other people have asked this question, and I don't know if you've asked your mother this question. And if you don't want to answer it, that is perfectly fine. Why didn't Jacob go with you? Why couldn't your dad have Jacob too?
I have not asked my mom that question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Your dad didn't have a very super stable situation for
we were
you,
living
though,
in
correct?
A friend's house. It felt like it was like a converted garage situation. We were sleeping on bunk beds together.
Okay. And Jacob does probably need it, Mom, more than you need it.
Yeah.
Not that you didn't need your mom, but an infant needs that more.
Well, and I think
dedicated time. I just didn't know if
I think too, because I was in school and my dad was working in California, and my mom had childcare with my grandmother for the most part. So I think that was probably part of it.
Okay. That makes sense.
So he kept. Do you think the suspect planted the idea of you leaving in your mom? Maybe, it's possible. Yeah, he might have planted that idea.
Oh yeah, I think he definitely did with the start. I think he's the
Mm-hmm.
one that started the jealous of, and that's a
Mm-hmm.
perfect of reflection, because I think he was jealous because he only went after Jacob. Like you said, he might have raised his hand like he would or act like he would. I think it was less that you could talk, but I think he felt Jacob took her time and her love in a way that
Yeah.
he couldn't compete with.
Yeah. I mean, and you start to see that in his behavior later as well, like his possessiveness and his controlling nature. Um, so one of the things my mom told me that was kind of shocking was that he kept trying to get her to talk to him, and he would leave her all these letters on the car or at work for her, or drop them off at family members to have them give them to her. And almost all of those letters say that he wants to meet her at the graveyard, at Jacob's grave, which was really weird. Um, who does that?
Huge red flag. Yeah, I tried to understand his play there.
My mom, my mom
I
thinks
don't
that
know
he
what the
was.
play is
It's
there.
an isolated area. She thinks that he was gonna kill her. So
Wow. Okay. I mean, because maybe she was starting to finally see through everything. Either take me
mhm.
back and live this lie with me, or I now
Well, and
have to
he's
get
at
rid of
risk,
you
right? He's at
too.
risk now because people are seeing through his facade. And so something happened. They ended up back together. I don't know what it was, but I remember this very clearly. The state police brought him in for a polygraph examination, and um, we went with him. So it was in Santa Fe, which is a 2 hour drive from where we lived. And we were waiting in the car for, I would say, at least 2 hours. It could have been longer than that. And he comes strolling out, basically like in a really good mood. And my mom's like, "How did that go?" And he said, "It's fine. I passed." And so we left. And we didn't think anything of it. So for those of you that have not heard this story, just keep that in the back of your mind. Um, a lot of the things with the autopsy report I'll get into in a minute, because these are things we didn't really know about back then, because this information wasn't given to us. One of the questions that the police asked my mom on the night of Jacob's death was if she thought her boyfriend was capable of hurting Jacob like this. And she said, "I don't think so." And um, that was later used against her. And I'll get to that in a minute as well. But I want to point that out. Like, we didn't think that he was capable of this. We thought he was this great guy, and he was my dad's best friend. So we didn't expect him to be capable of this.
No mother thinking that someone capable of hurting their child is going to hand
Yeah,
someone their
yeah.
child.
So so we're living with him, and things start escalating pretty quickly. He he starts becoming violent with my mom, and very controlling and manipulating, and anything really. Oh yeah, Alex, there was no evidence that I could see of shaken baby syndrome. I didn't see anything that showed that, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't there. It just isn't in the report. And the report is missing a lot of stuff. So there would be times where I would look at him. He would say something, and I would look up at him, and suddenly uh, he says that I'm giving him dirty looks, and my mom would say something probably along the lines of, "He just looked at you, and now he's beating the shit out of my mom." And this kind of stuff happened, you know, pretty regularly. And every time it happened, and my mom was expected to be somewhere, or we were expected to be somewhere as a family, he would line us up, and we would have to go through the story with him over and over and over and over and over again until he felt like we had it right. And so if someone asks if, what happened to your mom, what are you going to say? She was in a motorcycle accident, or she fell off a horse, or whatever the story was for that day was what we were supposed to do. And we knew that if we fucked it up, it was over. That was it. There would be hell to pay. So we did. We lied. We did our best. He had 2 kids. They lived with us part time. They were in on it too. We all had to smile, act like everything's fine. If we were caught, not doing any of those things, we would be punished.
What was your relationship with the other kids from his previous relationship? Trauma bond?
It's weird to me to think about that now because I didn't really understand, because it wasn't nearly as bad when they were there. Like, it was bad, but it was never as bad as when it was just me. So it was always way worse when they weren't there. Yeah.
It was like it was
Yeah.
spread
And
out
so,
when they
like, I
were
think
there.
probably because they would go to their mom and they could tell her what was happening. So it was always less intense when they were there. I think we had I think we had an
They were the
okay
buffer.
relationship. I do suspect that they had some trauma from him as well. I don't really want to get into that, but I do suspect that there
Right.
was some abuse there. So his daughter was a year older than me, and his son was a year younger than me. So we were all, you know, within a year. No,
Are you close now?
no.
No.
Um, so the abuse kind of escalates, and there were some things he did to me. Like, he would lock me in my room for 9-10 hours a day. I wouldn't be allowed to use the restroom if if he didn't feel like I needed it. So there were days where I wouldn't be able to use the restroom the entire day. He put a refrigerator in my room full of drinks and snacks and stuff so that I would not bother him. And I was basically like a prisoner. He would lock my bedroom from the outside so I couldn't open the door. So one day, my mom and him are having a massive, massive fight, and his kids are actually here for this. And it's horrible. My mom is just screaming nonstop, and suddenly she stopped, and I started to panic. And so I broke my window in my bedroom, and I ran outside and I started throwing rocks at their bedroom window, like as big as I could hold. And I busted their window open. And he comes running out to chase me, and I go taking off to the neighbor's house. I learned later that at that very moment, my mom was losing consciousness. He had wrapped a wire hanger around her neck, and he was strangling her. And if I had not, done that, she thinks that she would have likely died. But that gave her enough time to get out of the house and to run away. And even then, like, we still stayed there. And he would say things in front of me to my mom, like, the only way you're leaving me is in a body bag. And we believed him. And so,
Of course. Of course you believed him because you lost Jacob. You knew at that point what he was
yeah.
absolutely capable of
So,
doing.
um, So I think we're with him from the time I'm 6 until about almost 11 years old. Maybe I was 11 or 10.
Ooh, those are some formative years.
And one night, my mom's at work, and he starts to sexually abuse me. And he tells me that if I ever say anything, he's going to kill my mom. So I didn't say anything.
Because you believed him. Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
But
what they
at the same
do.
time, he's trying to groom my cousin, and she's 14. And he didn't know what she was like, because I think that if he knew that, he would have not done that. He's calling to my grandparents' house where she lives and trying to get her to come over so that he can abuse her, and tells her not to say anything because nobody's going to understand. Nobody's going to get it. And she she never cares. She never cares about what she says or what anybody thinks about what she says. And if somebody tells her not to do something, she's going to do it. So she told everybody. And and she saved us. She saved me, because that was what my mom needed. That was a fire that she needed to get away from this man. And I'm always going to be grateful for that, because she did what I couldn't do.
It's not what you couldn't do. I don't ever want you to feel like something you couldn't do. He literally put you in a place where you had no choice. I don't think it's fair to put that on yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah,
so we left.
Of course.
And he stalked us for a good 2 to 3 years. He would go to my bedroom window in the middle of the night and knock on it and say, I'm going to fucking kill you. And I'm going to kill your mom. And no one's going to know. And this happened for a couple of years. I mean, now I see, like, back then it was just like, oh shit. But now I can see that he was trying to intimidate us from going forward to the authorities. And it worked.
Also he had control so long, and he wanted his victims back. There's a huge part of that where to have to go out and groom more victims, to have to take the chance that they're going to stand up and say something. When you already have victims you feel like you can control, you feel like you've got that power on, and you lose them, you're going to do everything in your power to get them back. So it's a double-sided sword for you guys.
But my mom went to the DA and the police and asked to reopen the investigation into Jacob's murder. And the DA said, why would I do that? You're only changing your story now because you're going through a divorce.
She was a female, right? DA? No, it was the first reporting detective was the female. Yeah. I'm trying to. Okay.
Lee Deschamps was the DA at the time, and he was a fucking piece of shit then, and he's a fucking piece of shit today. And I will say that as loud as I possibly can.
Agreed.
Every interaction I've ever had with him on anything has always been horrible. Luckily, he's not the DA now. No, Braun, he's not. But the subsequent DAs weren't much better than him. So the police and the DA all treated my mom like she was this woman scorned who had a vendetta and was only trying to cause problems for her poor ex-husband who everybody likes. He played basketball with the entire police department every Saturday. He was friends with them. He worked for the county. He had keys to every county office. Um, he couldn't possibly have been responsible for this, according to them. So nothing happened. And we, like I said, we felt like maybe we're making this worse than it is. Maybe we are the bad people. Maybe we're the ones causing problems. Um, and it wasn't until we had quite a bit of separation in 2005 that my mom reached out to a cold case investigator with the state police, and that's where we got this case file from. Was from him, and he, under no uncertain terms, basically said that this guy's responsible for Jacob's death. Now, there was no way to prove if it was intentional or not, if it was negligent or malicious, but it's clear that he was the one that was responsible. And so he forwarded this case after his review to the DA, a new DA, and asked them to reopen the case and to press charges. And they said, first the DA said that there were a number of issues that would prevent him from pressing charges, and first and foremost would be the statute of limitations, which I've learned recently is not a thing. Um,
I was fuzzy on that. I was like, what statute of limitations? I
it
was
used
hoping
to
you would
be
explain what
a
he meant
thing
by that.
that um, child abuse resulting in death, which is a classification here, it's much easier to prove than um, first degree murder. The burden of proof is a lot lower. And so prosecutors will often defer to that charge because it carries a heavy penalty sometimes, especially for a first time offender. That penalty could be heavier than if they, tried to prosecute, or the fear would be that they try to prosecute first degree murder and it gets thrown out because there's not enough evidence to prove it. So they'll go to child abuse resulting in death, and they can go either intentionally caused or negligently caused. The penalty for negligently caused is lower, but it's also easier to prove. But so back then, there was a statute of limitations on that charge. That that was reversed
Mind-boggling.
sometime in the early 2000s by the state Supreme Court. And so there was even a statute of limitations on murder in New Mexico back then. And so that's all been taken away. And the case law shows that it has been proven to be possible to be grandfathered in, even though at the time that this happened, there was a statute. The Supreme Court basically said that that doesn't matter. So it is retroactive, Prawn, is what I found out recently. I just learned that last month, honestly. And I can't tell you about how I learned about it or anything like that. So, but I do know that now. And so that was his first thing. His second thing was we have something called speedy trial in New Mexico. And what that means is the second you're charged with a crime, you're entitled as a defendant to a speedy trial. So basically, the prosecutor has to do everything they can to move the trial along as fast as possible. There can't be any delays for dramatic effect or anything like that. So, excuse me. So he said based on those two things, he's not able to prosecute. And this is in 2005. Alex, I don't know what ex post facto means. But If you explain it to me, maybe I can answer that question.
A lot of words.
Um, and you can jump on and explain it if you want. You don't have to type it. Yeah, so
Definitely.
it does apply to cases that were before the law was passed. Yes. Yes. And so yeah, it was challenged in the first case and the Supreme Court ruled that it was retroactive. Can't be applied to a current case. Okay. So that's what the district attorney thought, but that's been a higher authority has claimed that that is not the case. I'll just say that, and I'll leave it there, and you guys can figure it out. Okay, cool. I think you put the pieces together, Alex. Okay, so but what happened was we didn't know any of the other details about this because we didn't have access to this information until my mom requested some of the documents from the DA. They gave her a bunch. She got a copy of the cold case investigator report, but she didn't get everything. But that's when we learned that the doctor or the coroner said that the trauma to Jacob's head was similar to the open hand of an adult male, that the injury was consistent with that size. That doesn't mean that that's exactly what it was, but it just was an observation that the ME made. Um,
I
okay,
promise you that is what that doctor
really?
saw on the CAT scan that he
Okay.
did too. Yeah, I promise you he saw that
Mm,
on the CAT scan before he went in.
new.
That's why he looked at him when he came out.
So
He knew.
I'm not sure if it means the bleeding was that size. They just said that that's what the injury was consistent with. Right.
Because there was no bruising apparent, right? And that's a big thing in the emergency room that we spot right away. That is children in the 80s and the 90s that were lucky not to be abused. Let me tell you, open hand. There was also a big
Mm-hmm.
trend. I don't know if you ever heard about the phone book beatings, where you stack a book that can bend or curve over your child, and you beat them with a blunt object. And what it does is it
Internal
keeps
bleeding.
the bruising
Yeah.
from happening, but it
Yeah.
causes all the internal damage. Yeah.
So um, we also learned that he confessed in his interview with the state police. What we don't correct. Well, no, the state police he didn't play ball
He
with. That
plays
was
ball
the
with.
local police. What we
Oh,
don't
good.
know
Okay.
is what that confession was. There is no transcript. There is no recording. There's no documentation other than the one little sentence in the police report that says the sergeant said a polygraph would not be necessary in as much as the suspect confessed. That's the only reason we knew that there was a confession. And the only reason we learned that is because I requested the documents this year and I read them. So that was new information. We had no idea that he had confessed. And so who knows what happened to his confession. The other thing that I learned is that he did not pass the polygraph. He failed the polygraph. That was pretty shocking for my mom and I because we believed the whole time that he had passed it. And I think those were like the most notable things that came out of us reading these documents. It's pretty clear that he's responsible. What's not clear is I'm convinced that it was intentional, but I think that a prosecutor is going to have a very hard time
Me
proving
too.
that, especially this many years later. So my expectation, if the DA ever decides to reopen this case, is that they'll go for child abuse resulting in death negligently caused, because that's probably the only thing that they can prove, at this point. So the problem, there's a lot of problems with it. The biggest problem is that he has no record. which is shocking. There's more
Because
victims,
I guarantee you there's more
which tells
children
me
and
that
victims in
maybe
his
his
pathway.
relationships with law enforcement and county officials continue and have continued for the last 33 years. And that's alarming. If you ask me, it's alarming because there's no way he changed his behavior. There's just no way. Um,
Mm-mm.
might be, yeah, but we don't know. These people would have to come forward. So Brown said we might be able to build up a witness file, and we don't know who those people are. We don't know. I mean,
They're going to open that trauma up or be willing to put out that you've been abused mentally, physically, sexually to the whole world
yeah,
comes with an internal blame, an internal shame, and
yeah.
some people bury
And
it and don't ever touch it.
I think that if they could do that, they could show a
So
pattern.
that's hard.
Which could make an argument. But the what bothers me the most is that they could have made these arguments in the 80s and the early 90s, but they didn't.
90s,
Uh,
yeah.
and that's, to me, that's complete negligence on the part of the DA. It's complete negligence on the part of the police because they refused to do anything. My mom's getting her ass kicked every single day and almost dying. When we reported my sexual abuse, they did nothing. Nothing happened. So there's a lot of looking the other way. And so I think that the DA is going to have a very hard time wanting to dredge all that up. So right now I
How
have
can
I
we
have
help?
a petition for the Attorney General to look at the case. I agree, Alex. They could have easily made the case then. It's too late now. But I'm requesting that the Attorney General step in and intervene. Fern just copy and pasted that in there. Thank you, Fern.
Thanks, Fern.
I um, I'm thinking about petitioning the DA now that I know about the statute of limitations, because jurisdiction lies with the DA. It is the DA's case, and so I'm considering that. I'm waiting. I have a friend in that was a former prosecutor, and I'm leaning on her for some advice on that right now. I can't talk a lot about what's going on. There's been some stuff that's happened, but I'm just waiting to see. And once I know exactly what's going on, then maybe I'll have more concrete things that can be done, like reaching out to the DA. But right now, I'm leaning on the petition. Really, what I need help with is getting Jacob's story out there, to let people know that this has happened, because that's been the hardest thing for me. I've had some amazing people that have worked on this case and helped me cover it, like Fern, you, but I need more exposure. I need more attention. I'm sharing it on TikTok. I'm sharing it on social media. If you see that, please help me share Jacob's story. Tell people to, right.
We need
Tell people
like
to listen to
Dateline,
it.
NBC.
That's what I need. I need help making this massive, because if they're going to hide behind the fact that they screwed up so much, then I need to bring that out into the open so that there's nothing for them to hide from anymore. I am on Facebook, so I have a personal page, but I also have my True Consequences page, which is True Consequences Pod. I'm on Twitter at True Cons Pod. I'm on Instagram at True Consequences Pod, and I'm on TikTok now. And I'm like old, but I'm doing it. I'm on TikTok.
I'm learning TikTok too, and I have to get my 8-year-old
I
daughter
had
to
to
help
use
me. I'm like, how
YouTube
do you
to
do
learn how
this
to do
green
that.
screen thing? Like, what's
So I'm
happening?
not completely inept, but it's Eric Landin on TikTok. Today, Jacob's video that I posted has almost 20,000 views, which is pretty exciting. But I need more. I need more
That's
exposure on this
amazing.
case, and so that would help, as well as signing the petition, and just help me amplify Jacob's voice, because he has been ignored for too long, and he deserves justice. He deserves The person who hurt him deserves to be in jail. He deserves to pay for what he's done to my brother, to my mom, and to countless other victims, I'm sure.
And for those victims that wouldn't be able to come forward to watch him finally
Yeah.
pay,
Ron,
would
you can
be
jump
some
on for sure.
justice for
I'm
themselves.
sorry?
What healing are you doing?
Well,
what healing are you doing?
my show
or for you
is
are you
helping a
doing?
lot with this, because I'm amplifying the voices of people who have been mistreated by the justice system in New Mexico. And there was a case that I covered that a young girl was being abused by her dad, and nobody would listen to the mom because she had a past. And since the episode aired, I believe it was Monday night or Monday afternoon, the father was arrested. Those things are very
That's amazing.
well. I can't take all the credit.
Good job.
But I do that heals.
Huge credit.
That helps. And I'm also in counseling because I need it. But yeah, Bron, you can absolutely jump on. You don't have to, wait for us. Oh no.
Yeah, everybody, like anybody wants to jump on.
You're
it won't.
locked?
How do I? It should be spots open.
Is it locked for everybody?
Does it say locked for everybody?
Yeah. Maybe try refreshing it.
That's weird.
Bron, and see if that works.
To jump on. Yeah, because definitely want to hear from you guys what you think, and
or if you have questions for me
to say.
There you are.
Child cases are super hard.
Right. I was
Bron, there you go.
Interested about TikTok, and I know that oh my gosh, how have I just forgotten her name? That is just in
Sarah Turney.
Sarah.
We all know.
Has used it extensively. But I just wanted to let you know that TikTok used to be called Musical.ly, and it's actually known worldwide as it has the highest level of predator activity, and it's got the highest level of abuse, and they don't actually take action. And it actually really worries me. Sorry, I'm going to get really emotional. It really worries me that we're promoting cases about abuse of children on a platform that flies in the face of child abuse.
Oh my God.
And to be quite honest, I would really like to see our community get behind all of you and help you to get your case out there so that we can avoid using those platforms.
Yeah.
Because I understand the pull of it.
Yeah.
But
and Sarah recommended it to me.
I know, but I can't stand by it. I just can't. I cancelled my account. I'm off it. Look, my dog was on it, and it was they don't monitor activity. It's nasty. I actually went specifically to a cyber keeping your kids safe on the internet. It was the number one site. They said, get your kids off it, and I mean off it. But it wasn't.
Yeah, my daughter
have
doesn't
it.
have
was
it.
Get them
absolutely
off it.
Not.
And they meant teenagers even, and it's primarily she said that because she said, look, I've had lots of issues in the past, but it was because of what happened a month ago. And it was that someone, and this went through all of the social medias, that someone actually committed suicide on camera, and TikTok did nothing about it.
I remember that.
The other social medias were instant.
It took them a long time to
TikTok
take it down.
Just left it, and it went viral. It went viral on them all. But yeah. So I would love to see our community not ditch it, because I think I understand why it's valuable to you, but to be actually proactive in helping you to get your story out there so that we are less reliant on that.
Yeah,
and that means helping you to get out into the mainstream media. I think that's what it means.
It's been really hard to get any traction. You know, I have people like Fern from Evidence of a Crime helping me on Twitter all the time, and even reaching out to creators. But, you know, some of the big creators, they don't want to touch it, or they say they're going to. You send them a case file and then you don't ever hear from them. And so it's been very discouraging. You know, I'm not super aggressive because I have my own hangups about this case. And so I'm not going to push super hard because I feel bad. I know that this is a horrible case and not everybody wants to hear it. Not everybody wants to talk about it. And it's not like a sexy, the husband murdered the wife crime. You know, it's a terrible tale of child abuse. I get it, but it's been hard. It's been challenging.
Eric, I
typically cover children cases. DJ is actually one of my first adult cases, and then I did one, Diane, I do children. And I know I have people that message my podcast and say, you just need to do adults. We can't handle children. But as a child of abuse, I'm going to tell stories of these children. I connect to them.
And
I understand them. I've been in their shoes. I was lucky to get out.
Those kids
you were lucky to get out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we know what
Eric,
it's like
to
get out.
In a case that's a little bit similar. He was actually, I think, about 2.5 when he died, this little boy, and he was in foster care. And those foster parents actually fostered around 45 children, most with a disability, and all were seriously abused. And there is very, very, very strong evidence of cover-up. Very strong. And the person that was trying to bring it to justice, of course, they tried to shut her up, but her own issues and her own angst made it so hard for people to cover it, because she started to target those that were covering it up. And she got so angry and so resentful, and so it was all about those that were covering it up, in her seeking justice. And I completely understand that anger, but what it did was it prevented her story from getting out there. And I think you pulling back when people don't want to cover the story, what that's doing is it's preserving that quiet strength. Someone said quiet strength is real strength, or something in here. And that's right. You need to preserve that, because what it does is it actually it gives you authenticity. It means that people can engage with you and your story. Whereas what it did for her was it just built up this wall, and it was very hard to get to her. So yeah, that's right. And you've got to actually get other people to do that. That's what we were talking about last time we were on a video together.
Yep. And I made police chiefs hate me, and I have no problem doing it again, because you do have to reserve that. And when I told you I'm Team Jacob, I am Team Jacob. I'm not going anywhere. I can't believe this case wasn't more on my radar before, because like I said, children get me. I tend to gravitate towards them very quickly. And you need a calling campaign. You need, I mean, like you said, you're working on some stuff right now. I will call people. I will write senators, and I have no problem doing it. I have no problem getting people behind it that will do it too. We got, with DJ's case, we got to the point where they answered the phone and they were like, are you calling about the DJ Ficky case? I will write it down. But that's our job. We want them to be so sick of us. We made the GBI change their ruling. We have power in this community, and we understand how you have to hold a boundary, and you have to, keep a professionalism.
And I especially don't, because I don't even have a podcast.
So you let me know what you need me to do. Yeah, and I don't really care about my podcast. People know me. I don't give a shit. If I feel something, I say something. It used to drive me nuts about Alyssa's case personally, because I feel like if I was her neighbor, I would be like, that's it. We're out. I'm taking you. We're leaving. Now. Let that little shit
live in Mexico.
Come knock on my door.
Eric, because I was really interested, because this case that I know of is in Wisconsin, and I did some research, and the similarities between Wisconsin and New Mexico are freaking phenomenal in terms of their incidence rates of things. And I was really interested in that, and I'm wondering, you've frozen. Look, that's great.
Oh no, he froze. We've had nothing but problems with this. Well, because I feel like sometimes
I'd love someone to call it,
show,
like internet glitch show or something like that. We have glitches. Come join us.
Right.
Yeah, I know.
The challenge of today. All right, that's right. There is one called the. Oh man, he is frozen.
We killed his internet.
His internet died.
Maybe someone turned it off because they were worried about,
We did. We absolutely did.
Conspiracy.
Oh yeah.
No,
well,
just the truth.
You got a bunch of feisty women in a room that aren't afraid to speak their minds. Exactly. And that's the
see my Hugs and Kisses mug? I love this one.
Yay!
How cute's that? I know. It's a bit reflective at the moment. But...
Oh, that's cute.
Cool. Yeah, I'll think about a script. Thank you, Shannon.
Is there a kitty tail behind you, Erin?
Yeah, she's my daughter's cat. We have a love-hate relationship. So I'm guilted. I had a coworker call me and say, I have all these kittens. I don't know what to do with them. And if somebody doesn't come adopt them, I'm going to put them outside for the eagles. Yeah. So my daughter now has this rotten cat that was taken away too early. So she wasn't trained by her mother. So if you pet her too long, she bites you or attacks your face, and she's crazy.
I was going to say about,
but she's ours
till
till the end.
We had an idea that maybe we could set up some sort of a list of cases that need phone calls made. That maybe there would be a group of people who can't spend time reading about cases or online, but are actually happy to make phone calls during their workday or, between baby feeds or that sort of thing, where we would just write maybe a short summary of the case and what the sort of thing that we were asking them to say on the call. And that we'd rotate the cases through or, something like that they might feel that they were part of a group supporting cases and try to get a group together. And that way cases would feel they were supported and so hopefully we might be able to get something like that as we go along.
Yeah.
Eric, I was asking, when I heard about this Wisconsin case, I did some research because I was talking to a friend who lived in New Mexico, and I kept hearing, oh, it's the same here. It's the same here. And I thought, what? And the incidents of things in Wisconsin and New Mexico are so similar. Mm-hmm. Why? What is it about these two states? Any idea?
I don't know what it is about Wisconsin. I've never lived there.
Can you describe New Mexico? Like, what do you think it is about New Mexico that the issues are such that they are? Because they are different, aren't they? Or they seem to be.
Yeah. I was going to start going into that. So,
as an outsider, I see it.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of things working against New Mexico. One of the most difficult things to deal with is New Mexico is, I want to say 48 or 49 in the US as it pertains to poverty, which is a problem. It's a huge problem. Education, we're constantly 48, 49 in the country.
Do you mean state?
Out of 50 states, we are always at the bottom.
Okay. So if you ranked all the states, you're basically bottom.
Yeah, I think it's
educationally, financially, right. Their police, as far as the money put into their police departments, their social work services are overworked, underfunded.
Right, and so we're always racing Mississippi,
one of the worst,
to the bottom of those lists. We were recently ranked as the worst state for child welfare.
Yes.
This was last year, and the problem we have, to your point, Erin, is that because there's so much poverty, the tax revenue is pretty minimal. You know, our state as a government is very poor, and so there's limited resources. And so you look at things like Child Protective Services, it is not nearly close to even being funded to what it needs to be for the amount of cases that they have. And so social worker burnout, issues that you see across the country, it happens everywhere. It's exacerbated here.
And so that
not to mention
flow to mental health services, to
all
that
of
sort
it.
of thing as well.
It's all a problem.
So all of your social supports, housing support, all of that welfare would all be affected. Yep.
There's a huge percentage of kids who the only meal they get is at school.
Oh,
in this state.
Right. That's right. You get, we don't have meals at school in Australia. That's not a thing.
Yeah. If we didn't have that, kids would starve to death here.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why I left Arizona. Same thing. I watched my daughter go to school with kids that I just wanted to take them all home. And my husband's like, look, we don't take other people's children, but you just felt like you needed to, her classmates not having a place to sleep, coming to school dirty, hadn't eaten in weeks. And in the summer,
so
we don't know
they have free
how
lunch
they're
here.
fed. We don't know
they have free
how
lunch
they
here in the
make
summers
it through that summertime.
And they're all over the state and in every city.
Oh, wow, good.
And so kids will ride their bikes to the neighborhood park and pick up their free lunch because that's the only food that they're going to get for that day. So, you have food insecurity, you have home insecurity, you have because of the poverty and because of the lack of education and because of the systematic cycle of abuse that continues and the lack of justice that comes out of that, you start to see this repeat, and it turns into, I'm abused, I'm taking drugs to cope with my trauma, I am now in a relationship, I'm now pregnant, I now have a child, I'm a drug addict, I'm traumatized. I don't know how to deal with these feelings. I don't have access to resources to process my feelings. And so now I'm starting to be an abusive parent because the cycle is perpetuating it. It continues. And then we have a situation here where I'm getting on a soapbox and I get very passionate about this, but we have a situation here where the laws are very defendant friendly here. They're very defendant friendly, and victims' rights are almost worse than the back seat. They're in the trunk. They're in the boot if you're in the UK or somewhere else. They're in the trunk of the car. And defendants are just kind of like, fuck you, go ahead with your life, figure it out. And defendants are treated almost better than the victims in this state. So that creates more problems as well. Add on to that lenient sentencing, all these other things that are going on here. People in New Mexico, it's not an easy fix. It's not. We have to restructure the entire way the system is set up here, and that is not something that's easy to do.
No, not with that money.
Well, when there's no finances, there's lack of education, there's even your social workers. When I was living in Alaska, I had multiple social workers
$27,000 a year.
left New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada. Right. And they cannot help these children. And when they are trying their best to help these children, they're getting roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. I tell people all the time, I lived in North Dakota. And when I was removed from one of the times I was removed from my house, they had nowhere to put me. They were literally had nothing to do with me. So I spent the 4th of July weekend in the basement of a library on a cot with 2 police officers that would shift out, that would stand outside the door and watch me until they could figure out where to put me. This is the system that we have all over America. Unfortunately, there are some lower, our lower
they've got oil and gas money
down are even worse. And North Dakota had money. So how
it's not allocated properly.
They got all the money. So how but they're not putting it where it has to go. Exactly. And I don't know what bills we have to write. I don't know what we have to march on or what we have to change. And when we look at the system, there's a racial component to it because this isn't the typical face that is in it. And I can promise you that from being in the foster care system and going through juvie and all of it. I stood in front of judges that wanted me to explain why I was wasting their money. So you have to understand that it not only is there not a system, but they're so burnt. Then they get so heartless. You really are just a number on a piece of paper. And you're assigned a lawyer when you're in the system, the child is, that you never see your
one of the things that I've learned about in New Mexico, and it may be true in other places, and it's really frustrating. And Alex, you can maybe let me know if you know if this is true elsewhere, but prosecutors get to pick and choose the cases that they prosecute. And here, it's so much about winning. It's 100% about winning because that's what's good for politics. That's what's good for the DA. That's what's good for the Attorney General. If you're losing your cases, then you're not a good, effective prosecutor. And so, correct. And so
we won't get elected
with my brother's
again.
case, for example, a prosecutor could just be like, you know what, this is going to be a little bit difficult for me. And I just don't know if I can convince a jury to do this. So I'm not going to do anything.
That sounds to be US wide. And anyone I tell this to in Australia tells me I'm lying. And I say, okay, I'm going to give you 5 different podcasts to listen to where people are telling their story from different states. And you can listen to their story and they're not isolated. Like, I'm not lying.
My whole thing here is that I've come to terms with the fact that I may never get justice for Jacob. I'm not giving up. I'm not saying that as I'm giving up, but I'm saying that
take it back.
That I've accepted that the possibility
we know you won't give up,
is pretty high.
We are going to do it for you.
That this isn't going to go to trial. I've accepted that. What I've decided, though, is that I'm going to start campaigning for a law in this state that is going to compel prosecutors, require prosecutors to try every child abuse case that comes across their desk. You don't have a choice.
We have to take the campaign out of it. We have to take the re-election factor out of it. That's what it comes down to every single time. Why are they elected officials? Why do they have to campaign for their spot? The minute you put that in, it's exactly like you said. It is, can I win this case or not? And if I can't, I need to get it out as quickly as I can, shuffle them wherever they are. They're just a number. They don't have to look at our faces.
Oh, well.
They can quickly
my
move
understanding,
it on.
Eric, is
and
that
if they
there's
die
a
in the system, they die
that.
in the system.
Now, tell me if I'm wrong, but isn't there a problem with actually which case gets presented to a prosecutor?
Yeah. Well, that comes from the police.
Now,
right?
To me, there's something about, I think it's very wrong that a prosecutor should be able to look at a case and try it in their head.
100%.
I mean, that's just not on. However, exactly. Now, so what's
but
happening?
Our sheriffs get reelected here too. You have to remember that. So it starts with that.
So if I think back to Sarah Turney's case, what she was told is that we're not going to present this because they won't take it. Now, it's not up to them to decide that they won't take it. Sorry, that was me hitting the table. That was me getting incensed. It's not up to them to decide, just like it's not up to a prosecutor to decide they won't win. It's up to them
and for my case in particular, my case was presented twice.
Oh, yes. So in that instance, it was presented.
Right.
You're right.
So I'm starting there because that's a problem that's affecting me right now, right? I'm starting there. And then I can deal with other people's situations that are starting with the police and whatever.
Okay.
But this case was presented and the DA refused both times. And so that's what I want to take that away from you. If a child has been killed or if a child has been abused so badly that they've had to go to the hospital, you don't get to decide whether or not to try this case. You are going to try this case.
Because what you're trusting...
And that's going to make it very popular.
I mean, basically what you're trusting is that if this is not a case of child abuse... sorry, I'm trying to work it through in my head. Say you had a child who was in... If I had a child in my care where something happened to that child and I was not responsible, it was not my fault, and an injury occurred to the child, which resulted in that child's death, but it was taken all the way to court, the presumption would be that I would be found not guilty because the truth came out. Correct? Because it was tried.
You are right. Well, here's the thing, and I can see that side of it. I still think that especially because we have the whole innocent until proven guilty, and in this state we have the defendant is treated so much better than the victim, right?
Yep.
So you're going to have all those defendant rights in that situation, and they're going to do everything that they can, and
that's right.
The prosecutors are going to have to
so we're trusting that will work, and therefore there is no reason to not try it. Is that right?
Correct.
Right. Okay.
And my part of this is for my mom and I. The fact that this was not even given the opportunity
I know
to go in front of a jury,
it's insane,
is the worst pain that I mean, it's almost worse than losing Jacob. Losing Jacob was the worst. I'm not discounting that, but what I'm saying is that every time we've come to this point and we've been told no, it's like we're being stabbed, and And I just want them to fucking see how wrong this is. That's all I want.
Well,
it's wrong.
It's because someone died, baby, adult, whoever, someone died. And that person was meaningful to you, and it has never been assessed.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reality. Someone,
and no one's been held accountable. And we have to go back and realize that in America, we just got victim rights in, I want to say, late 70s, early 80s. And it was a senator whose own father and mother and I believe sister were brutally murdered. And he had to stand on the Senate floor and beg for victims to have rights. Like, I mean, we're still reeling, and we're still in a new world of victims' rights. Even though it's a law, victims are still questioned. Their families are still treated like the enemy. Like, right. It just, we haven't really in America rallied around the victim and their family. We don't have that mentality here. And I don't know how we fix it or what we do about it. But I think that is the hugest key of changing anything with this. The fact that we had to have a senator's family be brutally murdered the way it was, and for him to have to beg on the Senate floor to make it a law.
But it also explains
exactly where we are in America,
and those sorts of things often do take
still
quite a long time to filter around, because you've got to remember that's going to have a direct impact, and then it's going to ripple out. So this is not that. What year was this, Eric?
87.
So it's actually, it's within a decade, and that's not long in terms of legal and just changing
well, and New Mexico's
attitudes.
behind it. New Mexico's behind everything.
Exactly.
So
it's. I don't know if you followed. There's a case that I've been following a podcast of from New Mexico, where nothing was done about a death of about a 15, 16-year-old. And I just can't remember the name of her now. Tara Calico.
Tara Calico, yeah. I covered her case on my show.
Right. Very, very interesting podcast, and how that was all, handled. It's with the FBI at the moment.
What? No, she was a middle class,
absolutely
educated,
was she a kid in the system?
Opposite.
White, 19-year-old. She was 19. She was going to the University of New Mexico.
But she looked younger, didn't she?
And she was there. Spoiler alert. Cover your ears if you don't want to hear this. There's a significant amount of evidence that points to the sheriff's son as the person who killed her, and there's a significant amount of evidence that shows that it was covered up by that department, and it's still presented by a lot of the big podcasts as unsolved missing, but there was a really well done one of her high school friends, or podcast by one of her high school friends. It's a very in-depth investigative podcast. She
amazing.
She did such a good job.
Oh,
she's actually working on a documentary about the case. Yeah. No, I
need. Yeah.
What?
Have you submitted to Unsolved? No?
Do they do child deaths?
Okay, now we know what we do. Everybody know how to email Unsolved. We've done it before. Get your butts on there and do it. They do. Yes, they do child deaths. The older ones
do child deaths.
They covered child deaths.
Sorry, do they do deaths where, like Eric's and DJ's, that are quote unquote obvious? Like, dare I say, but it's freaking obvious what happened?
I think they do.
Oh.
Because if you've watched the most recent ones, they're all obvious.
Like,
Eric,
and
I don't know if that's because of our minds and how we think that we're like...
Okay, it could have been a build-up of incidents. How did those incidents happen?
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, we know so much more now than we did back then.
Right.
Like, if the case was tried back then, the evidence wouldn't have been, it would have been different.
That's true. Like Justice Blonde is saying that if it is kind of almost like you have to have a suspect that has had a charge or a record.
Never been charged
so it's really
either.
hard. I guess in this case it would be hard because
old
this guy does not have a record.
That he used to live with relative to you.
Really...
Are they older?
One's a year older, one's a year younger.
May I ask how?
What do you mean how?
Was he with your mother?
Oh, he had a wife before my mom.
And so are they her children?
They're his ex-wife's children.
Sorry, that's right. He wasn't with your mum when you were born. Duh. Sorry. It's okay. I'm a bit slow.
I worry about things like unsolved mysteries.
Yeah.
I have a lot of reservations about that. I have a lot of concern about that. Mostly because
really?
I don't want his name getting out there. I don't want him tried in the court of public opinion before he's been officially charged. And I worry with something like that they would have a very hard time not bringing his name and situation into this conversation.
Yes,
I will.
Good point.
I will not send a case file to somebody that refuses to not name him. I won't do it.
No.
And I did that with you right away as soon as you said
you're right.
I'm like, okay, but you can't say his name.
Yeah,
like that was the first thing I said. I worry about that, and because where it happened is such a small town, even not naming him, even just knowing my mom and me,
even knowing
they know who he is.
You could put it all together.
Correct.
But also, I really hate.
Yeah.
So the way I do podcasts and the way I write my articles, they're more focused on the victim. I do not like to give the suspect any attention. If I can write an entire article without their name other than to mention like, oh, by the way, this asshole's name is, in case you want to do your own research on this asshole. I don't dig into how they grew up, their lives there. I honestly don't give a shit. They are a piece of shit. We've all gone through trauma. How you turned it around and became a bigger piece of shit in your life does not reflect on me, nor do I care. It is about the victim. It has to be about the victim. The only time that asshole's name should be mentioned is one time if they have to even. Why do we have to mention their name? Why? I just don't. It drives me absolutely insane. And so I will get a lot of feedback from people saying, well, I want to know more
Erin,
about,
I think I said to you the other day
you're in it for the wrong reasons. That's what Google's for. Go Google it.
Looking at perpetrators is that we can learn more about behaviors, motivations, that sort of thing. But you've actually... Exactly. And you have to be looking at it for that reason.
And I think we can do that without naming them.
I mean, I'll ask Shannon.
Totally think we
Shannon,
can do
did
that.
you learn about his behaviors and his motives and everything throughout this conversation without us naming him tonight?
I mean, I knew it.
Because she's never heard his case.
Oh, great.
So I'm just curious if Shannon felt like she got that information, because I feel like I paint that picture still when I tell the story.
That's right. And you have to be wanting to learn that rather than wanting all the nice gritty details.
Right.
Because those are people that are in it for the wrong reason. There is a podcast, I won't name them, but they offered to work with one of the girls that I have whose mother is missing. And she listened to the story. She was like, this is great, da, da, da. And we had two people that we didn't want to name their whole name. We didn't want to kind of put anything out there. And I was like, go for it. You know, this person's podcast is huge. You need to go on it. And they said, unless we can name these people, one, and unless you have other family members and friends that are willing to come on and speak so that we can have multiple interviews, you are not worth our time. How is not one person telling their story from their perspective worth their time? Or they will get, I had another girl that I helped cover her story, and she was going to be on this other podcast. And then she was like, well, they said that too many people have covered it.
Because
that
they get ratings
job.
for novelty. Like people will listen more to their
what
podcast
do you mean?
if they've got
Someone
a novel
else
case
covered
on there.
It. Like,
those are the podcasters that are in it for the wrong reason. Those are the podcasters that are looking for fame. They're looking for money out of this, and they see true crime as entertainment, and that drives me insane, because my pain, my trauma is not your entertainment. And if you think that, you can fuck off.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yep. For you to come out, people do not get the side of America that is the most disgusting is when the victim comes forward, they're going to dig into our past. They want to prove how we became the victim. It's not that we were just born into some bullshit. No, we have to prove that we did something wrong. We saw it coming. We should have left. It's all this blame. And that's the side that they want to know. They want to know how you put yourself in those shoes, in those situations. And that's just not how it goes. Some of us are just born a shitty deal. Like, right. And I believe that there are true evil people born as well. I don't always believe that it is created.
I see it now. I can tell now. I just have to look at somebody and I know. It's unbelievable. Like I can feel it inside of me. I'm like, ooh, I gotta get away from this person.
Right.
That's why I had to leave my job. Eric, I had to leave my job because I used to work in forensic mental health.
You can see your fellow
and
broken
I started to
people,
burn out
right?
because I was around it all the time. It was so draining to be around it all the time. You know how you can protect yourself for a little bit?
Yeah.
But when it's just so intense all the time.
Yeah.
Just couldn't do it all the time.
And I think there's this uniqueness to
I don't
being
know
broken.
Why either.
People hate when I say broken. I don't know why, because I really think that our breaks, we fill them up with these like beautiful, like we become this beautiful mosaic glass that has all these cracks that we've healed from. I think being broken makes you stronger than anything else. And I think broken people see each other from across a room, and we can connect it as quickly as we can connect evil. And I say this all the time, if we talk about our trauma more without shame, and we talk about, because it's so prevalent, it really is prevalent. I wouldn't be amazed at all, shocked if my neighbor went through the same bullshit I was going through as a child. But we didn't talk about it.
And the interesting thing,
you're trained not to talk about it.
But
you're trained to shame.
Is that you actually don't need to talk about the specifics of the trauma you've experienced. It's actually about engaging with the feelings that go along with trauma. So the hurt, the shame, the pain, the self-doubt, it's all of that stuff. They are the commonalities, and talking about that and identifying that, they're the things that we all have in common. And you can do that without triggering all the hurt inside of yourself. Whereas if I was to sit here,
it's awful.
Yeah.
Now, Eric, I want to ask you, because it seems like we had some similar traumas. Do you ever tell stories to like friends and family that you think are the safe stories? And you get I don't
tell any family anything now.
Does that ever happen
learned
to
that
you?
Because I learned that early
a lot.
Yeah.
And
bye, Alex. Thank you for joining us tonight.
The safe one.
So it's funny you asked that. Yeah.
Alex.
I'm going to kind of go on a long-winded circle back to that. When I started my show, the people that knew about Jacob were right away, are you going to tell Jacob's story and tell Jacob's story? And I was like, yes, but not right now. I can't do it yet.
First.
Yeah. And because I knew I would want my mom there, and I knew that was going to be hard for both of us, because believe it or not, prior to us recording that interview, we had never sat down and talked about this together, ever. We've never had a conversation start to finish about this, about any of it. And my family was also very much, we don't want to hear about that. We don't want to talk about that. We couldn't even say Jacob's name at Thanksgiving without people getting like, oh, no, we're not talking about this right now. We can't hear this right now. So my entire childhood was, no, stop talking about this, from people that I loved and people that I trusted. And so I started to, like you said, feel that shame, feel that insecurity, feel that doubt about what I was feeling. Like I started to feel like that was bad. What I'm feeling is bad because nobody can handle it. So then I started to protect myself by not talking about it.
Yep.
And then with people I would get close to, I would let out a little bit.
And judge
and then wait for their reaction. And if they were like, oh, then I'm like, oh, I'm not going to talk about this with you. So to answer your question, that was something. And so the other thing that happened when Jacob's story came out finally, where all these people coming out of the woodwork, like, I never knew that. I'm like, well, of course you fucking didn't never know that because I didn't tell you. I'm not just walking around to strangers like, hey, let me tell you about my 9-month-old brother who was murdered. Like, that's not something that people do.
Oh God.
Right. Like, how do you start that conversation with people? Like, people don't absolutely
100%.
do not get it. Like, and you've learned that you've had to become another person. You have to live these dual lives, which is really fucked up and exhausting to
I would have killed for that.
And then when they're like talking about their childhood and their lives, and you're just thinking, shit, that must have been nice. Because right. Or like, and I always tell people, when they do learn your story and they do know your stuff, like some of my closest friends go, God damn, I'm calling my parents and apologizing.
Yeah, your trauma is still your trauma.
And I'm like, they're like, I thought I went through, and it doesn't take away from what you went through. It does not mean that exactly. And if we start just talking about how our traumas are trauma, maybe
it makes me laugh. People are like, oh, you're so well adjusted in spite of the fact. And I'm like, no,
honestly,
I'm not. I'm a fucking mess.
You don't know me. Really, you don't.
Yeah, I look at you.
No,
I'm just kidding.
This part is well adjusted. Up here's not so well. Yeah.
Yes.
But I mean, think of the things that the directions we could go, because it is a cycle. Like when I look back, it's a very big cycle. It's always been in my family. It's always been normal. It's always been a thing. So, I mean, I could be a really fucked up parent, and I'm sure I'm messing her up in some ways. Hopefully, it's just like little things that I'm putting away therapy fund either way. She's probably going to need it because I'm raising
13 and 16, and I've already paid a freaking fortune.
My husband, the same thing.
It's because I recognize the value of seeking help as well.
Fern.
But you do.
Definitely. And that's something we don't have that acceptance in America. We absolutely, like, they call it the nut house, and you're crazy.
Would seek help you would seek counseling
when you're
for
like,
your child.
I've been to a mental facility. They go, what?
Okay, just like I do. And that's what I mean. I've already paid out heaps because
100%, because I would recognize it. Right. And that's when and I mean, from the beginning, I've taught my child that evil wears a pretty face, evil wears a smile, evil comes to you in the very nicest
and make
ways.
you think that everything's okay,
Evil
and
will
that they're
hurt
the
you
best
and then
person that you
turn
could
around
trust
and
in the
make it
world.
better.
And until you've experienced that and seen it through to the other side, you're not able to see that.
Yep.
You can't. And I think that's where the cycle continues, is it's not that some people don't see it. I think they just don't know how to be anything other than it. And to transfer what they learned, even if they say, well, when I grow up and I have a child, I'm going to do this and this
I
different.
Actually had a theory,
there's so much of you that's programmed
Eric,
from that abuse growing up as a child.
Abused by him.
So
and I wanted to run that by you.
I want to know.
No, sure, my theory is that maybe he was physically abused and that he grew up and physically assaulted his abuser. And he knows that boys grow up. Look at who he physically abused. He abused a baby who couldn't defend himself and couldn't talk. And he abused an adult who was of a grown size. Do you see